Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today I'm going to be doing my wrap up of February's reading. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books. Today I have quite a hefty pile of books to discuss, which are the books that I read in February. So February was a really good reading month again, and I managed to read 12 books. None of them were audiobooks, but quite a few of them were library books, and one of those library books was a digital copy. My 12 books read amounted, according to Storygraph, to 4,366 pages read. I'm going into March with 2 books carrying on into March. One of those is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier, which I am over halfway through and may finish it today, but didn't quite finish it in time for the wrap up. So yeah, this is going to be my first March read. I'm really enjoying it. The other one is my audiobook for this month, which is The Blade Itself by Jo Abercrombie. I'm still listening to that, and I haven't done much listening lately, so no progress to really report on that one. I did read 4 books in February for the Booktube Prize judging that I'm going to be doing, which is Group H. So I'm not allowed to talk about those books here because I have to wait until I've read them all and the results come out. And so I'll just show you them here. I read The Promise by Damon Galgut. I read The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. I read China Room by Sanjeev Sahota. And I read How Beautiful We Were by Mbolo Mbue. More on those in a later video, which leaves us with 8 books to talk about today. Now, I talked about a few of these in my sort of mid-month wrap-up, so some of these I won't talk about in too much detail, but I will give you what I thought about all of them in my usual sort of categories. If you're new here, I don't really place that much value on star ratings. Like, I do think about it, and I do give things star ratings on Goodreads, but when I used to really rate books, I used to rate them out of 10, which I find easier, and now I tend to just sort of break them down into okay, good, very good, and favourites of the month. And we're going to go from my least favourite to my most favourite. Sadly, we're going to be starting with a book that I really don't think I can rate any higher than okay. And that is the book that I read with the Eclectic book club this month, which was run by Shelly Swearingen and David Wiley, and I will link all their details in the description down below. This is The Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights by John Steinbeck, and I was really disappointed with this book. I found it very dull in comparison to what I already had experienced of King Arthur. So when I was younger, my mum used to read me and my brother King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table stories, and my brother was quite obsessed with them for a while, so we definitely did have a lot of these stories read to us. This was not very similar to that at all. There was a couple of familiar stories, such as The Sword in the Stone was mentioned, Merlin was mentioned. The characters were familiar to me, such as Sir Lancelot, Sir Gawain, and King Arthur and Guinevere, but I was just really disappointed with this. And when you reach the end of this, there is actually a large appendix with letters from John Steinbeck to his, I believe, his agent or his publishers, or possibly both, while he was writing the material that formed this book. And this book was actually published posthumously, and it is unfinished. So I think that is my main problem with this book, is that it's not finished. A lot of the really famous stories that you would expect to see here are not there. This was John Steinbeck translating and adding his own spin to Mallory's translation. Didn't really enjoy the style in this. There was one story that I really enjoyed, and for that reason I would give this 3 stars instead of less. And the story that I really enjoyed was called Gawain, Ewain and Marholt. And this was a story about 3 knights going out questing and talking about the 3 different roads that they took with 3 different damsels and what happened to them. That was a really enjoyable story. It did suck me back into this collection, but unfortunately that was the second to last story. And the one at the end, which was the longest, which was about Sir Lancelot, actually didn't feature any of what I was expecting from Sir Lancelot, so yeah, I was quite bored by it. I am really sad to say that because I really expected to enjoy this. I do think if you're not familiar with King Arthur, you might enjoy this more. I'm also not familiar with John Steinbeck's work. This was the first book of his I read, and I don't think it's fair to judge him on something that he didn't actually get a chance to edit and finish. So I will try other John Steinbeck books, and please do let me know in the comments which are your favourites so that I can try them. Moving swiftly on, pretty much everything else I would rate as very good or above. This book is going to just about scrape into very good. If I was giving star ratings, it definitely would get a 4. And that is The Sea by Iris Murdoch. This is a very chunky book, and I read this with Sandy's lovely 1001 book club, and I'll link all the details for that in the description below as well. This was my first experience of Iris Murdoch. It's definitely been a month for trying new authors and different authors and different types of fiction I wouldn't normally try, and this is a really interesting book. I'm going to link Sandy's video down below talking all about her experience with The Sea because it's really interesting, and she actually went to a state park with a big expanse of salt water in it, and it's a really good video, so I'll link that below. The Sea is about Charles Arrowby, and he is a man who used to work in the theatre and has now moved to an isolated cottage by the sea. The first part of the book pretty much drags. It goes very, very slowly. I did enjoy it, but it took me a very long time to read it. And the reason I enjoyed it was because I actually really liked Charles's diary-like writing, and I liked the way he told us everything he had to eat, even though some of the things he liked to have for lunch were pretty weird. But I enjoyed all the discussion of food. It was very much repetitive of his daily routine, and everything was very quiet for a few of the histories, because this book is told in histories. By the time you get to history, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4, things start to really liven up and kick off, especially in 4 and 5. And guests come to Charles's house, multiple guests. Charles reconnects with some former lovers and talks about other former lovers, and it just gets crazy. He's a very unreliable narrator. He makes very questionable decisions in the mid part of this book, to the point where you think that you can't stand Charles. He's an awful, awful person. However, there are lots of exciting events in that mid part of the book. Unfortunately, I thought this went back downhill in the sort of epilogue called the postscript. The postscript was, for me, too much, didn't need to be there particularly, and again it went back to a sort of dragging and monotonous style in a very broken up way, and I can see why it was included. It didn't ruin the book for me, but I just didn't particularly need it on top of all the other pages. But I really enjoyed this book, and although it's a slow burn definitely in the first part, it's very difficult to put down in the middle part and towards the end. Yes, I would definitely pick up more Iris Murdoch off the back of this. It was not what I was expecting at all, and Charles Arrowby will certainly stick in my mind for a long time to come. The next book I'm going to talk about, which I would definitely rate as very good, was Death on the Nile. This was a reread with Christie Fest, and I've already talked about it elsewhere. It's probably one of my top 10 Christies, maybe just under, maybe in the top 20. Again, this is a book that is a bit of a slow burn. There's a lot of character build up in the start, but Christie does this really well. On display here are some of Christie's most horrible characters, and just some of her writing is absolute genius. It's a really intriguing mystery at the heart of this one, and you do have to work to get to it. I wouldn't recommend reading this as your very first Agatha Christie, but if you do, just give it a chance to build up. The build up is well worth it for the payoff. So if you like a good whodunit, Death on the Nile is a good one. Next up is a book that I read over a period of 2 months with the Wolf Hall Along, which is being hosted by Marissa at Blatantly Bookish, Emily at Novell Novels, and Tori at Hufflepuff Discovery. We're going to be reading Bring Up the Bodies over the next 2 months. and following that up with the final book in the trilogy. So in January and February we read Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and I have rated this as very good, but it's a tricky book to get to grips with. This was my second attempt at reading it, and I got on much more successfully than I did the first time, but Hilary Mantel does not make life easy for you. She writes in a very distinctive and sometimes difficult to get to grips with style, but once I was into this book, I was into it, and I really, really enjoyed following the character of Cromwell. So Thomas Cromwell is the main character in this book, and this one really charts his rise in fortunes and rise to basically the top person in Henry VIII's, I guess, government. Yeah, Henry's most trusted advisor in the end, I think. I'm looking forward to seeing where the next book goes, because this book spent much of its time dealing with the divorce from Catherine of Aragon, the controversy with the church, and moving on to the Anne Boleyn marriage. And what I really liked about this actually was that Cromwell's life was very separate to that for most of the time, and you did hear what was going on in court, but it was very much in the background, whereas Cromwell's life was in the foreground. I had no idea what an endearing character he was going to be. He has his own share of tragedy and his own things going on, and I was left feeling overall like, although he is not usually portrayed as it in history, that he was perhaps underneath it all a good person, and certainly he is a character that Mantel gets you to root for. Really looking forward to the rest of this trilogy, so I won't say much more about this here, but yes, I really, really enjoyed this. It could have made it into my favourites of the month, but I think because it did take me quite a while to get to grips with, and at times I found it slow going, I'm just going to say very good at the moment. But this is the sort of book that may change its rating over time depending on the rest of the trilogy, and I was very, very fond of this. I really enjoyed it. It just does require a bit of work. Another very good book that I read over January and February was a buddy read with Berna's Bookish Adventures and Loretta at Read Write Collage, and that was Pieces of Her by Karen Slaughter. I did talk about this in full in my other video, but this is a story about a mother and a daughter, Laura and Andy, and it's told in two timelines, and it's also about another character called Jane. Yeah, it's very, very pacey and intriguing, and I'd recommend this to thriller lovers, but as always with Karen Slaughter, it comes with the warning that there is gore, and I would say there's less gore in this than some of Slaughter's other standalones, but there's definitely a fair share of it. So yeah, approach with caution, but I personally love Karen Slaughter's books, and this was no exception. I really, really enjoyed this one. It kept me very entertained. So moving on to my favourites of the month, I'm going to start with Anne of Avonlea. Anne of Avonlea is the second book in the Anne of Green Gables series. I've already talked about this in other videos, but I absolutely love Anne and her world on Prince Edward Island in Canada. I really enjoy her friendship with Diana, and in this one she has become a school teacher, and it deals with some of the interesting things that happen to her as a school teacher, and also interesting dealings and changes in their household with the arrival of twins Davy and Dora, who certainly arrive into Anne's life with a bang. Really, really enjoy this one. If you've only read Anne of Green Gables, I would highly, highly recommend checking out the sequel. It's brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to reading Anne of the Island in March. Next up, we have one that I won't talk about too much because I reviewed it in the last week or so, and that is The Couple at the Table by Sophie Hannah. This was the 11th book in the Simon Waterhouse and Charlie Zayler series. I generally call it the Culver Valley series because that's where all the books are set, in the fictional Culver Valley, but on Goodreads it's called the Spilling CID series. My favourite thing about this is that it's got at its heart a really good, juicy, closed circle mystery, and Sophie Hannah has done a really good job of that mystery. I also really, really loved revisiting the characters of Simon and Charlie, who are just fantastic characters who I've been following for a long time. I think this probably wouldn't have the same sentimental value if you don't know Charlie and Simon from the other books. I know they're not for everybody and some people find them quite annoying. I don't find them annoying. I really enjoy their books and I hope Sophie Hannah writes a lot more of them. Finally, we've reached my very favourite book of the month, or definitely up there with the other two, and that was The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. Again, this was a buddy read, and this was a buddy read with Mitzi at Mitzi Reads and Writes and Art at Bookshelf Odyssey, and I absolutely loved this book. This book has definitely given me a new favourite author to just keep trying. I had no idea Bradbury was so versatile and could write just stuff like this. All I'd read before was Fahrenheit 451. This is a series of not connected short stories that are only connected by the idea that the stories are illustrations on a man's body, the illustrated man. Each of the stories is completely different, like so completely different that you could believe if you were told that these were different authors almost. Bradbury does have a kind of a style, but he turns his hand to anything and everything. So there was time travel, there was living on Mars, there were stories about this world, there were stories about other worlds, there were stories about like amazing technologies. The things that Bradbury envisages in this book are amazing. You can't believe it was written such a long time ago. I'm really enjoying Ray Bradbury and I plan to continue exploring Bradbury. I'm really enjoying his work, and rarely for a short story collection there was not a single story in this one that I would say I didn't like. I enjoyed all of them in their own ways. Some of my favourites were The Exiles, and that was a really good story with lots of references to Dickens and other authors in that one. I really enjoyed Usher too, which had quite a lot of reference to Edgar Allan Poe in, and I really enjoyed a little 8-page short story called The Highway, which just has stayed with me in this collection. I also really enjoyed a story called Marionettes Incorporated. Fox and the Forest was probably a particular favourite as well. It's really worth a read. Top favourite of the month goes to The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. Speaking of Ray Bradbury, I have gained a book by Ray Bradbury onto my giant TBR this month. I won this in a giveaway on Instagram, and Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes has been added to my giant TBR. Also new was The Couple at the Table by Sophie Hannah, but I have now read this. So with the new books added onto the giant TBR would have stood at 194, but I read this one straight away, so 193, and I just missed out on my target of reading 4 from my giant TBR, or like 1 per week, because I didn't quite finish My Cousin Rachel, but I did finish from my giant TBR Wolf Hall, Pieces of Her and Anne of Avonlea. So my giant TBR comes down to 190. So we do have some downward progress this month, yay! Let's hope that next month is much better for the giant TBR, because as you can see I read a lot of library books in February, and hopefully most of my TBR for March is not library books, it is books from my giant TBR. Well, check in on that again next month, and that's about all from me today. So thanks for watching my wrap up of February and all the reading that I did. I hope you enjoyed some great books in February too, and please do let me know in the comments down below what were your favourites of the month, and have you read any of the books that I enjoyed. Thanks for watching today. Please do give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I've got lots to read in March, so I better go and get My Cousin Rachel finished, and I will hope to see you all again soon in another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.